onto Yankunytjatjara country, and I'm really grateful to everybody for joining this evening, this special event, really to remember before 70 years ago, our loved ones who were here on this country where I'm coming in from, to remember them and to remind us of those stories that they carried with them for 70 odd years. And I'm forever grateful for those amazing people before me. And I do want to acknowledge those old men and women, my grandmothers and my late father in particular, for his leadership and his direction, his wisdom and his guidance over the many decades, and his ongoing lobbying of our justice for Aboriginal people and the people who were impacted by these tests that took place 70 years ago. So I want to acknowledge that I am here on Yankunytjatjara country, and I want to acknowledge others wherever you may be joining in from as well. You might be coming in from your traditional lands, and I do want to pay my respects to you all. And thank you for joining this evening and for being a part of this event. We have a huge lineup and got some amazing people to just remind us about what happened 70 years ago, but also we'll hear from many other speakers around the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We'll also hear from the amazing work of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. And we'll also hear from Liz, who will talk a little bit about her recent book that she launched on the secrets of Emu Fields as well. So I'm really looking forward to being able to open up and share with everybody who's participated this evening, just the stories from Wayajara, from Wallatina, and just remembering what happened 70 years ago as well. I want to acknowledge my dear sister as well, Simone, for taking on this role as MC for this evening, just to keep the order and the run to tonight, and just so people are feeling informed and part of these discussions as well, and feeling that you can contribute. And I'm really grateful to you, sis, for taking on this little job, but to help us to remember those old people before us and to keep their stories alive and ongoing as well. So thank you again for emceeing. Thank you to the amazing panelists who have joined and wanting to be a part of this event. This is something that we're leading up to. The actual anniversary is on Sunday, the 15th of October. And, it just follows after a very important day across this nation as well. As you all know, we've been leading up to this big date of the 14th of October this year to remember First Nations peoples and to acknowledge, them in the Constitution, but also a big part of that is the truth telling. And this is the truth telling story that I feel I need to share with my people and to share with all of you who have joined this evening to be part of this event as well. So really grateful. I am going to catch my breath and hand it over to my dear sister, Simone, who can take us through the amazing lineup that we have, but also to step into this panel discussion now this evening. So I'm really honoured and I'm really grateful that I did make it on time, even though I probably broke a land speed record there at one point trying to get into Wallatina, but we've made it safely, and I'm grateful that I can come from the very country that my late father had felt this ground shake and the black mist roll. And I'm really grateful to technology that I can be part of this discussion here on the very lands where it all happened 70 years ago. And that's what's going to give me the strength this evening to really pull through and to really be able to continue the stories and, you know, honour those amazing people before us who have shared and continue to share their stories as well. So, Simone, I'm going to hand it over to you, my sis, and I'm really grateful to be part of this. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Gungaral Karina. I know that we are now going to go to share dear Uncle Yami's YouTube video now. So Jem's going to show that for us to honour dear Uncle's legacy and to share with you Uncle's important words.
In 1953, they tested the first bomb at Emu Junction. October the 15th, they let the first bomb called Totem 1. And we received radiation fallout over here at Walladina, which is 160 kilometers from here, at Emu Junction. And I seen black smoke rolling through the mulgars and above the mulgars, and it was shiny and black, and very, very quietly but deadly. And was right across from here to the east, 60, 70 miles across. With sickness, skin rash, sore eyes, vomiting, diarrhea. And we didn't go to white people's clinic. Only nearest clinic was at Annabella, 160 kilometers northwest of here, at Walladina. We couldn't get there. We had no vehicle, nothing. So it was very hard. We never had a medical treatment at all. So some people passed away, the weak ones, and I don't know how many. The government didn't recognize their what they done wrong. They didn't. They never. Australian government never apologized to what they done to our people, testing the bombs here.
So thank you so much for Gungaral for allowing us to share the important words of your dear mama, your dear father, and my dear Uncle Gungaral Yami, where Uncle talked about the mysterious poison, the black mist fallout after Totem 1 atomic tests in 1952. Thank you for sharing Mama's story, but also the important words that you mentioned right at the beginning of today, which is about the significance of truth-telling and the significance of truth-telling of the effects of Maralinga, but also the ongoing struggle and fight to protect country. So good evening, my name is Simone Walalgatur. I'm a Yankunytjatjara woman and my family are from the northwest of South Australia, from the Udnadatta region, Hamilton, and extended family on the Anangu Pitjantjatjara Yankunytjatjara lands. And it's my great pleasure to be able to MC this evening's event. So thank you so much for attending this webinar, Wati Ngintakanya Wankani, Waking the Perentie Man. And before I introduce the webinar and the panel members this evening, I would like to recognise and also acknowledge that I'm currently located on Gunny Yarra. And I also acknowledge all the traditional owners and custodians on the lands on which everyone is located this evening. This is and always will be unceded Aboriginal land. And in solidarity, I'd also like to acknowledge the Pacifica communities who are joining this panel tonight and recognise their connection to and protection of country. Wati Ngintakanya Wankani brings together traditional owners, survivors, nuclear veterans, experts and anti-nuclear campaigners ahead of the 70th anniversary of the first mainland nuclear test in South Australia at Emu Field. On October the 15th, 1953, the first nuclear weapon was tested on mainland Australia on Emu Field, south on the Anangu Pitjantjatjara Yankunytjatjara APY lands of South Australia. Not only did the operation fail to seek consent from the Anangu people, but the resulting radioactive black mist fallout had devastating environmental, health and social outcomes that persist today. 70 years later, there is a hope in the growing movement behind the UN Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and its potential as a tool to seek assistance for affected communities and environmental remediation under the Article 6 and 7. Australia has not yet joined the treaty, but we seek to change this. The 2017 UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons contains provisions for assisting victims and survivors and cleaning up contaminated environments under these articles. Now, these provisions are a key reason for Australia to join the treaty. In June 2023, the Atomic Survivors Delegation, 4 people, including Magundulu June, who may be joining us this evening as well, and Gunguru Karina, and 2 people from the nuclear veteran community travelled to Canberra to share their experiences and expertise and their stories and their truth-telling of the effects and the intergenerational effects of the tests. They met with the Foreign Minister, Office of the Prime Minister, and many other parliamentarians to talk about the impacts of nuclear weapons, what survivors need today, and why Australia should join the ban treaty. Their key demands were for recognition, respect, and repair. To commemorate this anniversary, Gunguru Karina and the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, Australia, have collaborated on a civil society statement that acknowledges the devastating humanitarian impacts of these nuclear tests and calls for the Australian government to sign the Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty. 132 civil society organisations have endorsed this statement, including health, union, First Nations, youth, religious, humanitarian, environmental and peace organisations. And this will be publicly released on Sunday, and everyone in this room this evening will receive a copy in their email. I would also like to acknowledge many of the South Australian activists who have continually fought to protect country and also to campaign against the proposed waste dumped repositories. So in particular, I'd like to acknowledge the Kupapiti Konkajura, the many women from Kupapiti, and their story of the Wati campaign, the poison leave it. Many of you present tonight, this evening, will know this important story. In 1998, the Australian federal government, under the Prime Minister of John Howard, made an announcement about the plan to build a national radioactive waste dump in South Australia. The proposed location at that time was Bilokalina, northwest of South Australia. And from the start of the announcement, the Kupapiti Konkajura said, no, the Wati leave the poison. They said, we are the Aboriginal women, Yankunytjatjara, Andagarinya, Kukatha, we know the country, and we said no straight away. Now, their campaign was grounded in their senior women's knowledge and their responsibility to and for country. And as a result of the direct effects on family from the Maralinga atomic tests between the 1950s and 60s on Wajabedi family, country, and physical and spiritual well-being. The Kunkas spoke out, and they did not stop telling their stories. They did not stop telling their truth-telling. Now, they were successful in the campaign, and the proposed dump site was abandoned in 2004. And they said, we take our responsibilities very seriously towards the land, the country, the jukur. All this is law. So we stand with all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. We stand with Pacifica communities in solidarity, when we honour all First Nations peoples fighting to protect their country. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our panellists this evening. Gundali June Lennon, and I will confirm if she is with us in a moment. Betty Recall, Alan Owen, Dr. Elizabeth Tynan, and Scott Ludman. So Gundali June is a Yankunytjatjara Pitjantjatjara woman, and she's a director of the Yankunytjatjara Native Title Corporation. Gundali June was 4 months old when Totem 1 nuclear bomb was detonated at Emu Field. Her mother, my grandmother, Gamilali Lennon, and brother Bruce Jummal were recipients of the compensation due to ill health caused by radioactive contamination. Together with Karina, who is a nuclear veteran and a nuclear veteran descendant, June and both Karina travelled to Canberra as part of the Atomic Survivors delegation this year to meet with Foreign Minister and other federal politicians about the nuclear test legacy and the need for Australia to join the nuclear ban treaty. Our other guest tonight is Betty Recall. Betty joins us from Fiji, and she's committed activist across climate and nuclear issues in the Pacific, president of the Youth Misafor Pacific, and the Yamirakul, sorry, I can't say that quite right, enabler for the climate justice of the Pacific Conference of Churches. Betty will participate in the second meeting of the states parties to the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons at the UN in New York later this year. Alan Owen is a nuclear veteran descendant and a founder of LabRats, the legacy of atomic bomb recognition for atomic test survivors. He is a former chair of the British Nuclear Testing Veterans Association. Alan's father is a nuclear veteran who participated at the Operation Dominic on Christmas Island in 1962. Associate Professor Elizabeth Tynan works at the JC Graduate Research School in Townsville, Queensland. She researches the history of the British atomic weapons testing in Australia, and her first book on the topic, apologies, my voice is a bit froggy, Atomic Thunder, the Maralink Story. Her latest book is The Secret of Emu Field, Britain's Forgotten Atomic Tests in Australia, and was published by New South Publishing in May 2022. Our final panellist will be Scott Ludlam, and Scott is an author, an ICANN ambassador, a former Australian senator representing the Australian Greens. He served in Parliament in 2008 to 2017, has held the portfolio of nuclear issues for 9 years, and during this time has contributed to campaigns on uranium mining, waste dumping, and nuclear weapons. So that's our wonderful lineup of panellists this evening. I will just check with Jem to see if we do have Gundali June Lennon with us. We do. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Gundali June Lennon. June was a baby when the black mist rolled through. She tells us about how these events impacted on her life and her family. Thank you, Gundali.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm one of the first generation survivors of the Totem 1 and Totem 2 bombs that were detonated in Emu Fields. My mother, father, and brother stood out and watched it all go off, and suffered contamination from that. Dad was never received a payout, although his skin condition didn't show up until much later in his life. So, and my brother and mother, it has always been a part of their life, as has with my sister and I, who suffered seizures from that point on. And that's not the only things that we suffer with. We have chronic illnesses that, you know, run in our families, such as diabetes, you know, high blood pressure, organ failure is in our families, and our families are, you know, from APY, Uluru, Kupapedi, we lost a lot of the Kupapedi ladies. Organ failure. My mother now is 92 years old. She's 93 in December. She doesn't have any quality of life. It is really hard for me to, my niece looks after her in Adelaide. I go and see her whenever I can. But it's so hard to be sitting in the room with her, looking at her, seeing how, remembering how strong she used to be. And knowing that, you know, we may not have her for as long as we want to. She has asked not to be resuscitated because she's tired. And that brings us a lot of pain as her family, the remaining family, you know, because we love our mother. We never want to be without her, as we all are, I guess. But, you know, that day will come and we just have to respect her wishes. Over the last 7 years, we've also lost family members to premature deaths. And that was a big toll on my mother, because, as you know, with, you know, they always feel that they should go first, and the young ones shouldn't go before them. Yeah, the most horrible thing is watching your family suffer from all these illnesses that they shouldn't be suffering from. And even if we had to suffer from this, then, you know, maybe the government could have done something humane, like, you know, give us a gold card so that people suffering from all these illnesses, you know, could have accessed some support. You know, there are so many things that my whole family suffer from. You know, it's not just the things like I've mentioned, like diabetes, but there's also mental health. No wonder if a bomb's been dropped on you, how could you not suffer from mental health, anxiety, and, you know, never-ending grief. I'm sorry, I'm finding it really hard because I've just had my last, just a couple of weeks ago, I think I was with Mum, and it's just sort of really, and that's when I found out that she, you know, didn't want to be resuscitated, because at the beginning of this year, when the doctor asked her that same question, she said, "What do you mean?" And he said, he told her, and she said, "Well, I want to keep living, you know." And now we've come to this stage, and all our family, we lost the grandson that we lost in this year, was the one that she grew up from the age of a baby. So when we lost him, we kind of thought that, you know, this might happen, that there wouldn't be long between. But it's just seeing, you know, every day I see my family, and there are so many problems with their health. And, you know, nothing was said. Nobody thought about the effects that those bombs would have on our family. But I can tell you that our family is not a well family. You know, we've had, you know, there's cancer, there's, you know, we've had miscarriages, we've had birth deformities, we've had births where the mothers have had to birth their babies only to bury them pretty well straight after. I wonder what the government thought when they did all this in, you know, with their lies and secrecy about Emu Fields, about anything to do with Aboriginal people. We were just, you know, not considered to be not considered to be people, human, who had the right to know what was happening in their own country. And And for us now to be sitting watching the soon, knowing that we will lose our mother, knowing that it's a natural thing, but this is far from natural. My mother, I believe, would have lived a lot longer, and my father, he died when he was 69. Mama's always been, since then, the backbone of our family, as they both were when we were growing up. I can truthfully say that I'm a strong woman today because a strong woman raised me. And which Karina and Simone, I can kind of see you agreeing with me in our hearts. And I know the same about, your parents. They were just so strong, such strong people to have had to go through what they did. They didn't deserve it, nor did any other Aboriginal people, nor did the veterans of this country. It is just so heartbreaking to live day by day, knowing what the government did to the people of this country. And, we don't gain anything from that. All we gained was a lifetime of illness and a lifetime of grief, watching our families pass on long before their time. I just, even if they had known what was coming, even looking at the bomb as depicted in all the, I just, I try to put myself into my mother and father's shoes and my brother and sisters and sort of think, how would I have felt watching that? It's something that, surely it's something that happens in other countries where wars are where wars are happening. You don't expect it to be in a peaceful country where people are living and have always lived. Why did they do that? What was the need? And where is the support after the fact? My mother, my niece finds it hard to receive any help for my mother at the moment. There's supposed to be this care package where you can get all this, where you can access all this help. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, they're always being, moved around and, oh, you're not eligible for this, you're not eligible for that. They're at the end of their life. They've suffered, and they suffered because of a bomb that was dropped on them in their own country. One of the, and that's why one of the things that we must never let happen again is the nuclear weapons being put on our country, not just for Anangu, you know, but for all Australians. You know, it's just something that should never have happened and that should never happen again. And that's, you know, that's why I believe firmly in the treaty. Because Australia deserves to be free from nuclear weapons. For those reasons, they don't deserve to go through the pain that we've been going through with our families. You know, our immediate family was so unwell. But it's coming down through the my son, who is now 32, was only just diagnosed about a month ago with the same skin condition that his grandmother has had all her life. So that's, you know, not only I've got to answer the door. It's my grandson home, sorry.
Gundali, thank you so much for sharing your important words and your messages. And I think really what resonates for me when hearing you retell your story of Mum Nyongonjo, Magamilali, and family is the ongoing effects of those tests, the intergenerational health conditions and well-being of our communities. But Gundali, when I hear you speak, I want to thank you, because what you are calling for is for justice for our Anangu families and for the broader community. So thank you so much for your words. I'm now going to move on to our next panelist member to share their thoughts. So Betty will talk about some of the impacts of nuclear testing in the Pacific and how they are still being felt and across Pacific resistance to nuclear weapons today. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. Are you able to see my slideshow?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Betty.
All right. So, Yahweh and good evening from Suva. I bring you warm greetings from the Pacific Conference of Churches Secretariat and want to thank ICANN Australia and Karina for this opportunity to join together to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the first bombs at Emu Fields. I extend my most heartfelt condolences to all throughout the world who have felt the impacts of nuclear weapons, especially to the First Nations people of Australia, who continue to shoulder the burdens of nuclear and colonial violence and who carry painful memories and have to relive them on this day. As a Marshallese woman, it pains me to say that the history of Emu Fields and horrific Black myths resonate too closely to our own sorrowful past. Reading and hearing about the Black mist reminds me of the radioactive ashes that fell over Rongelap Atoll in 1954 after the Castle Bravo tests. Children ran out to the beaches. They played with the ashes, ate them, and put them in their hair like shampoo. They believed it was snow. How did they know about snow? Because of the animated movies shown by the Americans to win over the Marshallese people. It took 3 days to evacuate the Rongelap people. The late and great nuclear justice advocate Darlene Keju recounted stories of how the Rongelap people were forced to strip down in front of one another while the scientists hosed them off like animals, mothers in front of their sons, fathers in front of their daughters. When they were finally evacuated, they had to swim out to the boats, elderly people, women with their young infants against dangerous currents. They were given only one blanket per family, even if they had 12 or 10 children. They were later returned to Rangalap and told it was safe, but don't eat the fish from this side of the island. Later, it was revealed that scientists left the people of Rangalap on their island deliberately to, quote, study the impacts of radiation on human beings. Stories about Rangalap and Emu Fields may just be a single page in a history book, but for too many people and communities across the Pacific, it is their everyday life and reality. When young Marshallese students interviewed Rangalap survivors like Bede and Edmund, who mourned her entire family and had to take 9 pills a day for thyroid cancer, she had only one wish: to return to Rangalap one day. Bede passed away without ever seeing her wish come true. Next year, the Marshall Islands will commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Castle Bravo test on Bikini Atoll, and I am confused and appalled. Why have our people and yours not seen justice yet? I have asked the same question as June. Are we not human beings? Even after all this time, we are still facing the impacts of nuclear weapons, yet the same perpetrators continue to cause destruction and regard our land and oceans like faraway places, isolated and devoid of life. But we all know that is not true. Today we rise to Karina's invitation to honor our intangible heritage, remember our ancestral stories, and learn from the lessons they share. Our nuclear legacy is not just one of tragedy, it is also one of great resilience, resistance, bravery, and unwavering humanity. Because of this legacy, the world will soon be rid of nuclear weapons. To the survivors from the surrounding lands of Emu Fields, you are not alone. We at the Pacific Conference of Churches resolve to draw upon the strength and bravery of those who came before us to continue to call on the UK, US, and France to provide full recognition, reparations, and remediation for all those they have harmed. We demand justice for the indigenous peoples of the land now known as Australia, Marshall Islands, Maohi Nui, Kiritimati Atoll, Fiji, New Zealand, and so many more. We call on all countries, especially Australia, to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and we call on all nuclear-armed states to do away with nuclear weapons once and for all. I am so grateful to have been able to share this space to learn, remember, and exchange stories and solidarity with one another. To close, I would like to leave you with a sentiment shared by Darlene Keju after a successful sail-in at Kwajalein Atoll to disrupt US missile tests. She said, "We are only a few thousand people out there on tiny islands, but we are doing our part to stop this nuclear madness. And although we are few, we have done it, which means that you can do it too. But we need your support. We must come together to save this world for our children and for the future generations to come." Como tada.
Thank you so much, Betty, for sharing your story, the legacy of your fighters and activists and community leaders in protecting country, and also the call for recognition, reparation, and repair. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I'd now like to invite our next speaker, Alan on. Alan will talk about the impact of nuclear testing on the people that worked at the testing programs, also known as nuclear or atomic veterans. He'll share how these are still felt today and what veterans are doing to seek justice. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of the UK nuclear community. And I wanted to start by stating that we stand shoulder to shoulder with the Indigenous people of Australia and everyone who was affected by the British nuclear testing programme, and those who still feel the effects today. It is a privilege for me to continue the work of many who have gone before us and those who are sadly no longer with us. 70 years is too long to wait. 70 years is too long to keep fighting for the truth, for formal recognition and appropriate compensation. As a British citizen myself, I'm actually ashamed that the UK government has still not issued a formal apology for its actions during the tests in Australia and the Pacific. We know that these tests were carried out at all costs. Even after Prime Minister Anthony Eden was told of the genetic effects of nuclear testing, his response was, "It's a pity, but we cannot help it." And this response has led to the UK government continuing to deny that anyone was affected by the testing programme. They've even stated that some veterans receive lower radiation doses than if they'd have stayed at home, which is absolutely incredible. But the disrespect for the sacred lands, the Aboriginal people, and their traditions is nothing short of disgraceful. All I hear from people telling me it's a different world then, but that's no excuse. The UK and Australian government knew what they were doing. They knew the effects. They knew that the lands would remain contaminated, but they continued on regardless. I was told recently at an event we held that the British nuclear testing programme was a stain on the history of the United Kingdom, along with many other stains that we live with. And I have to agree, but we must never forget that the UK tested nuclear weapons. But unfortunately, many people here in the UK are unaware that it happened at all. It's not taught in schools. Generations of children have grown up not even knowing that we did it. And in fact, the veterans and the Indigenous people and everybody that's been affected by it have been effectively airbrushed from history. One veteran told me, "I did my service, I was forced to do my service, and nobody knows that I've actually done my service. I have been airbrushed." So we must work together, and there are some great people here today and great people around the world to ensure that no one forgets, that the world is educated on the testing programme, its effects, and everyone knows that those effects are still being felt today, generations later. And we are working as lab rats on ensuring that the younger generations are aware of the testing programme and that they understand the devastation that they've caused, the desecration of sacred lands, the utter disrespect for the Indigenous people and their lands that remain forever contaminated. New evidence is emerging of the atrocities of the nuclear testing, the medical experimentation, and recording of blood counts which have been withheld from public view for 70 years. A new generation of descendants is emerging, like myself, and this generation are well-educated, well-researched, and are well-disciplined. We understand the legislation, and we're coming together to ensure that the UK government finally admits the truth, admits that they were careless in their planning, that they used the participants as guinea pigs, that they monitored them and then discarded them like rubbish, washing their hands of any responsibility. On a recent Freedom of Information request for documentation relating to blood counts, we have evidence of documents entitled Blood Counts from Natives, a report on medical examinations of natives. Well, why are these documents present? And why are there blood references in there? These documents have never been released by the UK Ministry of Defence. Every 10 years they are reviewed at a ministerial level, and a decision is taken to continue to restrict this information. Medical records are being withheld from the UK Ministry by the UK Ministry of Defence from veterans, widows, and their families, even when the information may help descendants who are suffering from genetic disorders, like me. I have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which was diagnosed following a cardiac arrest in 2022. This disease is slowly thickening my heart walls. And I asked the Royal Navy and Ministry of Defence for my father's medical records, as he died in 1994, aged 52. My brother died aged 31 in 1996, both of heart conditions, and my sister has had a heart attack. And they have denied me and my sister full access to the records, instead telling me that my father had 2 blood counts taken, but they will not give me the results. And I'm not alone. This cover-up continues. Veterans are receiving medical records which are missing information from their time at the tests, or themselves being refused access. And there are thousands of documents that have never been released, and thousands of documents who were removed from the National Archives for a security review. They've never been returned, instead of being moved to a secure bunker in Scotland. We have a new court case which will challenge the UK government to provide these medical records and to finally release information relating to the blood counts taken on the servicemen and their results. We have a memo, which we call the Gledhill memo, which states that Squadron Leader Gledhill, his blood showed gross irregularities and it needed urgent attention. But when the family have asked for those results, again, they've been denied access. We are hopeful that a change of UK government next year will change the 70-year-old edict, and finally, the truth will be heard, that the participants were put in harm's way, and the effects of ionizing radiation have affected these people and their families, as you've heard today. We should not be living with the legacy of nuclear testing and for still fighting for justice 70 years later. We attended the Labour Party conference in Liverpool 2 days ago, and at our event on Tuesday, Angela Rayner, who is the deputy leader of the Labour Party, committed to 4 asks, looking a veteran John Morris in the eye and saying, I will support a full accountability with a full inquiry. They will deliver our missing medical records and a Hillsborough law to improve public accountability and compensation for everyone affected. But we've been here before, we've had promises before, but we will continue to push them in order to make sure that they are implemented. Educating the world about the testing program, removing the weapons from the planet, implementing the TPNW, implementing Articles 6 and 7, establishing the International Fund for the Victims are all goals which we are working towards. But unfortunately, the UK government currently have no plans to even send an observer to the second meeting of state parties, which is absolutely disgraceful and disrespectful to everybody that's here today and everybody that was affected by the testing program. But we continue to raise awareness, we work together, we are applying pressure, and we are educating people. Continuing to do this, we will succeed. We will gain recognition, and we've done that through medallic recognition, but that was just the start. And whilst we can never remove the stain on the nuclear testing program, the history of the UK tells us that we did this. We can address it. We can apologize for it, and we can work with the affected parties for a better future for us all. This is not a big ask. All we require is truth and justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, for your powerful words. The call for an apology from the British government, the strategic erasure of not telling the truth of the nuclear test, and the enduring commitment to actually educate the international community, the British community, on the ongoing impacts and the legacy of the atomic tests. But I think the most heartening thing to hear is the call for the opening up of the archives on those medical records and the fight to actually have access to the rights of your own family records in terms of the health and well-being of our future generations. Thank you so much for your fight for justice and solidarity. I would now like to introduce our next panellist. Associate Professor Elizabeth Tynan. Elizabeth works at JCU, as I mentioned previously, as a graduate research in Townsville. Elizabeth has written a whole book about the secrets of Emu Field and will share some of her research on the emu testing program, the harm done there to people and the environment, and the importance of cleanup. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Apologies, I forgot to unmute myself. I should know that by now. And I'm going to share a presentation that will just loop through on its own to share some of the images of Emu Field, some of which were taken when I visited the site 2.5 years ago when I was in the process of writing my latest book, The Secret of Emu Field, and some historical images as well. But if you'll just bear with me while I just wait for the screen to allow me to share it properly. Just bear with me for a second. And I would very much like to mention that I'm coming to you tonight from the lands of the Bindal and Wulgurukaba people. And I'm at a place called Emu Field, which is just outside Townsville, a place that is very rich in Indigenous culture. Now, I've been very moved by what I've heard so far from the speakers, and I feel very humbled by the event tonight where we are honouring what happened 70 years ago. One of the things that always strikes me when I do my research, and most of my research is based on archival records, is just the sheer arrogance, irresponsibility, and even cruelty that comes through from the architects of the British test program. What strikes me particularly, and I talk about this in my latest book, is the lack of curiosity and the indifference that the test authorities had towards the people whose land this was that they were taking. They were detonating bombs in people's homelands, and the lack of care about that. In fact, the British test program was notable for its lack of respect for safety generally, and the lack of safety protocols, the appalling way that that this nuclear race was being held so that Britain could maintain its status as an imperial power. And all that really mattered was to show the Americans that it was possible for the British to build their own bomb and thus escalate the arms race. I went to Emu Field a couple of years ago with my colleague Leander Burrows, with my brother Andrew and a few other people, and I was overcome by the beauty of the place while feeling the weight of history as well. While I was there was a small-scale cleanup, and you can see some of the signs of that there, but it's never really been cleaned up. And if you'll indulge me, I would like to read a few excerpts from my latest book, because it talks a little bit about what was left behind and what damage was done to this site. I also, in my book, talk about the appalling legacy of the Black Mist, but I don't think anyone could talk about it more eloquently than we've heard tonight from Auntie June. So I would just like to share with you some very brief excerpts from The Secret of Emu Field, just to give a bit of an overview of the sort of thing that, that I talk about in my book. Emu Field was left contaminated when the British departed. It stayed that way more or less ever since. Operation Brumby, conducted by an atomic weapons research establishment team led by scientist Noah Pearce, undertook a cursory and inadequate cleanup of the Emu and Maralinga sites. A subsequent report, which became known as the Pearce Report and provided to the Australian government in 1968 as an accurate summation of contamination at the sites, outlined the activities of Operation Brumby. However, the Pearce Report was notoriously wrong about the extent of radioactive contamination at all British atomic test sites. Beginning in the late 1970s, through the Royal Commission of the mid-1980s to later analyses in the early 1990s, Operation Brumby and the Pearce Report were found to be deeply flawed. The Pearce Report gave only cursory information about the contamination at Emu and, more generally, kept the Australian government ignorant for a generation. Pearce's major purpose during Operation Brumby seems to have been a vain attempt to make the test sites at both Maralinga and Emu look like they'd never been used for atomic testing. At Emu, the major activity, other than removing all fences and signs, was to gather up various kinds of debris and trinitite. The aim was to remove the bulk of the glazing and bury it and disperse the remainder. They hand-scavenged the sites and graded and displowed an area of approximately 130 metres radius. They took a similar approach at Maralinga. The ultimate aim was to give all the sites the appearance of featureless areas of cultivated soil. The radioactivity they left on the ground was not obvious to the casual visitor. In 1993, the British government, after considerable pressure over years from Australia, including an angry and revelatory Royal Commission, finally agreed to pay part of the cost of cleaning up the atomic mess they left. After striking this agreement, the Australian government established the Maralinga Rehabilitation Technical Advisory Committee, MARTAC, to oversee it. In fact, the MARTAC cleanup dealt with Emu Field in a fairly cursory way compared with the much more extensive cleanup program at Maralinga, failing to spend the $600,000 specifically budgeted for it. Since being handed over to Ngintakanya in 1996, the Emu Field area has been managed by its council and is patrolled by the Oak Valley Rangers. These days, there are mounds of dirt and debris in many places, and the occasional attempt is made to remove the remaining broken and rusted items. The clay pan is as dramatic as ever and still vividly orange, even though it is blighted by old bits of rusting metal and other scrap left to moulder on its edges. Every so often an aeroplane lands there. Emu Field is a tiny slice of a vast swathe of beautiful and wild Central Australian territory, a place that is intimidating in some ways owing to its hidden water and its unforgiving climate. Its traditional custodians travelled across this land for millennia, inveterate travellers that they were, always on the move. At the time of the tests, no one lived there permanently and no one can live there now. The fact that this pristine land was casually handed over to a foreign power to test weapons of war speaks volumes about the peculiar bonds of colonialism. Many Aboriginal people lived within range of the Operation Totem toxins that were released without adequate warning or safety advice. It's still possible to find remnants of this remote and abandoned atomic test station, although they are not always obvious. The forgetting of Emu began as soon as the last serviceman and peace officer packed up their rough camps and headed home, away from the flies and the heat and the dust. The least visible but most dangerous residues are the wisps of long ago unleashed radioactivity and the immense human suffering and anxiety associated with them. This is Emu Field's secret, sorry, and enduring legacy. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you tonight.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing the extracts from your book, but also really highlighting the indifference that's been made evident through your research, the cover-up, the endurance to getting that you're talking to, and the human suffering as a consequence of that. Thank you so much for sharing your words this evening.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's now my great pleasure to introduce our last speaker for this evening, Scott Ludlam. Scott will share a little bit about the ICAN campaign, why Australia must join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and the relevance of Articles 6 and 7 that deal with assisting victims and survivors and remediating the environment. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be with all of you. And just I was going through the list of folk who've joined us tonight. We've had 81 people on the call, including some of the founders of ICAN and some incredible people who've been involved in this campaign for decades. So it's really an honour to join you, and thank you, Karina, for the invite. I'm joining you tonight from the traditional country of the Jurriganj people of the Yuin Nation on the south coast of New South Wales, on country over which sovereignty was never ceded. And I would like to acknowledge the incredible First Nations people who are on this call tonight, who've spoken so movingly of their direct experience of nuclear colonisation and its deadly impacts. There are also so many crew here tonight from ICAN. It's like a family reunion. There's nothing that I'm aware of that's quite like the ICAN family. I'd also particularly like to acknowledge the Executive Director, Melissa Park of ICAN, who's here tonight, and some of the founders, some of the people who gathered around that table not all that long ago in suburban Melbourne and had an idea to shake up the stalled and stale state of nuclear disarmament diplomacy. I think our most important protection against the use of nuclear weapons is keeping the memory really strong of what happened last time they were used. What happens to people, what happens to country, what happens to culture. There's a kind of institutional amnesia. It's kind of a cultural undertow of collective amnesia, I think, that prevails. And the things that various people have spoken of tonight, the hiding or destruction of records, the locking off of archives, the stonewalling, the waiting for people to die, frankly, the institutions that are just waiting the survivors out before they may or may not unseal the records of what happened. That institutional amnesia lays the groundwork for the kind of amnesia that allows AUKUS, nuclear submarine deals, or the potential unraveling of the nuclear testing framework that we're seeing so alarmingly occur at the moment. Submarines, new reactors, new mines, new waste dumps, that's what the amnesia allows. And of course, of greatest risk, it allows the contemplation of the use of nuclear weapons again, whether they be testing or use in conflict. And so the voices that we've heard tonight, and that's why I think events like this are so incredibly important, is that your stories and what you've shared tonight, I think, is the single most important thing that we have collectively to prevent these weapons from being used again and to fight that amnesia. These voices and these stories are absolutely irreplaceable. And I just want to thank you so much for speaking out so strongly over such a long period of time. This is a campaign that's now into its fourth generation. You used to think that issues like this were too big for ordinary people to grapple with. I'm fortunate, I guess, in the sense that the campaign didn't choose me. Nuclear abolition was forced on some of the people on this call, and you've taken up this fight with such high spirit. I've been very fortunate to have good teachers and to have heard many of these stories firsthand, but it's easy to be overwhelmed by the scale of what it is that we're up against. It can feel too distant or too remote or just actually too scary. But we've heard tonight about some of the practical things that we're able to do. The ICAN campaign for the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is an incredible story of how a small group of people, as that old Margaret Mead quote puts it, can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. people who noticed that the international negotiations to ban these horrific weapons were stalled. They were being quite deliberately, not just deadlocked, but actively sabotaged by the nuclear weapon states, who went out and did the impossible, working from humanitarian principles rather than these abstract strategic principles around deterrence and what's a minimal credible deterrent, mutually assured destruction, this kind of alienating language. They worked with the Red Cross and with nuclear survivors, the Hibakusha of Japan, and folk here closer to home in Australia, to work from the humanitarian principles. And they proposed a new instrument of international law that does for nuclear weapons what the world has already done for chemical and biological weapons: ban it. It was adopted by the UN in mid-2017, and I was very fortunate to be there and to speak, maybe a little bit cheekily, on behalf of the Australian delegation that had boycotted those talks after attempting to sabotage them in prior meetings. That treaty then came into force on January 2021, and now nearly half of the world's governments have signed on to say enough is enough. These weapons are weapons of genocide and they need to be banned. It's the campaign and this new body of international law that's coming into force has severely rattled the nuclear weapon states, as you can imagine. Now, our government, which is one of the world's nuclear umbrella states, so not, as far as we know, hosting nuclear weapons on Australian soil, although that could all be up for change, depending on how much this AUKUS agreement ends up costing us. The Labor government recommitted in its 2023 conference to signing the nuclear ban treaty. Now, some of the language in their platform is a little bit vague and applies conditions on signing that could be interpreted very widely. And it's time for action. The time for talk has well and truly passed. You've heard mention tonight of Articles 6 and 7 of the ban treaty. One of the things, I think Dimity shared the text of the treaty a little bit earlier in the chat, if you want to scroll back. It's written in plain English. It's actually very easy to understand. And a lot of these international instruments can be a little bit dense and read like concrete. The TPNW, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, reads crystal clear. Articles 6 and 7 deal with victim assistance, environmental remediation, and international cooperation to spread that norm. To spread the campaign effectively, that governments that sign on will then encourage other governments to sign on. But it's the first time that we've got language in an international legal framework. Oh, there we go. You'll see Articles 6 and 7 there that address the harm that these weapons have already caused. We're looking towards the future to banning these nuclear weapons once and for all. We're also remembering the past and holding that memory, that precious memory of the speakers who've joined us tonight. So when we hear phrases like victim assistance and environmental remediation, this is the kind of truth-telling that Karina spoke about, so that the working groups in Vienna and New York and around the world who are being put together by the various governments that have signed on in good faith, they're working with the truth. There's a working group that's been stood up to deal directly with Articles 6 and 7 and to progress that agenda, and they get to hear from people who were harmed by the deployment and testing of these weapons or the use of these weapons. And that's, again, the power of these incredible stories. Now, some of this feels like it's a little bit inside track. It's faraway meetings, it's diplomacy, it's the language of international law. ICANN's extremely good at it. You can sign up if you're not already. I suspect there's be a minority of folk on this call who aren't already on the ICANN mailing list. But please do hop on if you haven't already, because ICANN manages to make these processes that can look a bit opaque from the outside, makes them accessible. The other tack, obviously, is the public profile and campaigning. ICANN's also very good at that. They're not afraid of making a noise, of dressing up as international weapons inspectors, conducting weapons inspections, lobbing gigantic bombs at the gates of Pine Gap, or metaphorical prop bombs, obviously. ICANN also manages to have a ton of fun and make this campaign accessible and visible to people. So you'll see, I don't know if it's been, I guess it was spoken of a little bit earlier, there's a sign-on statement that's going to be released on Sunday that well over 100 civil society groups, activist organisations from here and around the Pacific have signed on to. When you see that, help amplify it. Give that a big kick on social media and spread the word and make sure that everybody sees that. When you see the black mist and the ban statement, please help give that a bit of a push. And on the 26th of November, as an earlier speaker mentioned, the second meeting of state parties convened. So these are the states that have signed on to the ban treaty. Will then look at progressing it and getting more nation states to sign on and to progress the individual articles, such as Article 6 and 7. There's going to be an International Day of Action shortly before those talks commence on the 26th of November, and you'll also then see actions that are unfolding around the world during that week. Australia attends as an observer, which is obviously better than not showing up or better than trying to sabotage the establishment of the treaty in the first place, but they don't speak up. They're not ready to sign. And considering that New Zealand, Aotearoa, was one of the founding signatories and has long since ratified, and most of the Pacific, most of our neighbours in this region have signed the ban treaty, and no harm has come to those countries. They haven't been kicked off the planet. They haven't been kicked out of the United Nations. They are a part of strengthening this norm that nuclear weapons need to be banned once and for all. And it's absolutely long past time that Australia take our place. And as a nuclear umbrella state, as a state that affords itself of the so-called protection of nuclear weapons of the United States government, for Australia to sign the ban treaty would be an enormous deal. It would make a huge impact around the world. It would, for a change, make an enormous positive example for other countries to take up who have not yet signed. So again, I just want to thank everybody who's spoken tonight for keeping these memories alive. And you'll see that what has happened is the first generation bomb survivors, having passed these stories to their kids, they're now being passed on to the next generation to make sure that these stories stay alive, because that, quite seriously, is the most important defense that we have against the use of these weapons at some time in the future. Thanks again to the organisers, to all of the gorgeous ICANN crew who've worked for so many years at bringing this together, and for everyone on the call for your part in this work and in making sure that we get this thing over the line. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Scott, for your strong messages. The call to keep the memory strong, to not allow this collective amnesia and to continue to fight against this. The importance of organisations like ICANN and the significance of the grassroots activism that is happening nationally and internationally against the ongoing threat of nuclear colonisation. Thank you so much for your words. We now are at the stage of the webinar where we have the opportunity to firstly thank our panelists we have now come to the last speaker for this evening, but this is now the opportunity to have maybe one or two questions from people online. So you are able to do that. I'm just going to confirm with Dimity or Jem that you can actually ask your question through chat, if that's correct, and then I will read it out. What I would ask you to do is if you could just please let us know who you're directing the question to, or whether it is to the whole panelist as well. So we will proceed with some questions. Thank you.
I believe people are being shy, Simone.
Yes, they are being shy.
It's astounding that there's, amongst this very curious and wonderful group of people, there doesn't seem to be a lot of questions.
Yes, so you can either put the question through chat, or you can ask the question online as well. I'm very happy, however, to read one of the chat messages, which is thank you very much to the panel. The courage of family members and others in truth telling is so powerful. So thank you so much, Winifred, for those comments. And how are you also awesome was one of the questions. So I do have a question from Dr. Lou Bennett, who's online. What is the government currently doing to address any reparations? If any of the panelists would like to answer that question.
If I may jump in on this one here, Sis, I think very little at this stage. I think the Australian government certainly treads carefully when we have these conversations, and quite open and frank conversations with, as the delegation did very recently, they are very smart with their words. And so there is not a great deal at this moment in time of what the Australian government is doing in providing that support, but also around reparation as well. So as Scott, and we've heard from the previous panelists as well, and Alan's spoken about this, it's time for that need for us to continue these conversations and to really lift our voices. And ICANN does an amazing job in being the voice for First Nations peoples of this country. They've certainly helped to bring my late father's stories out, but also the amazing work of Gubabidi Gungayuda, and all the people who have been involved in this. It's been, you know, a whole team effort of amazing people and awesome people, as Scott says, that this is ongoing, and it has been for generations. You know, I look back within my own family and we are at the 4th generation. My children are actively involved and participating and keeping their Popper's story, as they know their grandfather, to keep those stories alive and ongoing for the generation. Because as we heard from Scott, it is these stories that keep organisations like ICANN going forward, and us being able to share those lived experiences, which is what we heard from Sister June and others, also Beatty from the Pacific region. You know, these lived experiences is a very big part of the amazing work that this network of amazing people do. And I think the more we bring awareness to the broader community, the more we will push governments of the day to really act and to really sit down and listen to the voices, the concerns that people have raised, and to really look carefully at this treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons and the work that has been done around the Articles 6 and 7, and for us to be part of those conversations and those discussions. There's a real need for us as First Nations peoples to work closely to really speak up strong around that truth telling, because this is our story. And we really need to be able to continue sharing those stories, but to also, you know, work towards putting that pressure on where governments will need to sit down and need to listen to First Nations peoples and those communities who have been affected by acts of government of the day. So very little at this stage, but we will need to continue on building these conversations and having these conversations, but also putting the pressure on governments. And, you know, I'm hopeful that with somebody from the Australian government participating at the second meeting of the states parties in New York coming up in November, end of November, you know, that they are present, that they are listening, and that they are hearing the voices, but they're also asking the questions on why Australia is reluctant or is hesitant, of why they don't want to sign. We heard very clearly from the panelists talking about the secrecy and lies, and I think we want answers, and I think we want to know what is the story? What is the story around why we as a country are not signing on the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, but why we as a country are not hearing what Australia's involvement is in the AUKUS, and what is Australia's role? I, for one, and I know my two sisters here joining me this evening, knowing the struggles that we've gone through and the fights that we've had to, as First Nations peoples of our state of South Australia, are constantly having to voice these concerns openly to the broader community of the fear that we have of our state being the waste dump of the world. And we certainly went through some highs and lows, as in campaigning and constantly campaigning and the need to do that. And I really have a fear with Australia's role around AUKUS. Is my state of South Australia going to be pressured to be the waste dump of the world? Secrecy and lies. And it's time to be asking those questions to our governments of the day for answers. And that's what I'm asking for as well, is answers. Why the delay? And as we heard from our panelists, 70 years, it's not good enough for us to not have those answers as well. I hope there are more questions coming through, Sis, for other panelists as well. So I thought I'll just answer that.
Thank you so much, Gungaroo. There aren't any other questions, but there is some extra information from David Noonan in relation to AUKUS. So please have a look at that information provided from David as well. We are actually reaching near the end of our webinar this evening. Gungaroo, I wanted to ask you if you do have any final messages for our audience members this evening, and then we will end the end of this webinar with a song.
Thank you, Sis. I'm really looking forward to hearing this gorgeous song that Sister Simi has been very much involved in and pulling it together, and we will hear it for the first time, and we've been having conversations around it, translating it. And I think my only comment is to say that the translation on tonight's event is about Wati, Ngintakanya, Wankani. And Wati Ngintakanya is a very big part of the country where I'm coming from. The story is the story of the Perentie man. And we heard this from Beattie talking about the intangible cultural heritage that was present and is still to this day. But it has these scars of atomic tests that took place 70 years ago and continued on further south to Marilyngadaraja country. This Ngintakanya is a big part of the story, and the big moral is around the stealing of a grinding stone, which is such an important tool for us, but also it teaches about ways of conducting ourselves, the etiquette that we must hold in other people's country. And we see very clearly what happened 70 years ago when the British government came in, had no knowledge of how to handle themselves here and involve or communicate to First Nations peoples. Anangu didn't know, and Anangu certainly didn't give their consent for this program to happen on our traditional lands. Wati Ngintakanya certainly didn't give his consent of allowing these weapons to be tested and conducted on his traditional lands. And so this event is really about us bringing that intangible cultural heritage alive again, to say we do exist. Anangu do exist. Our stories do exist. And as we heard from Sister June, that we do and we are people who have purpose, who have meaning in life, who have cultural roles and responsibilities. And we see that and we saw that in the Gulbariri Gungayura and in the Yerari Wandi campaign. The amazing leadership, the amazing humble guidance that they led as they campaigned. Dad and his legacy will always continue on through my family and the generations to follow. And it's really important, as we heard from Scott, around this amazing network that we have with ICANN, and the relationship with ICANN is such an important part of really bringing these stories together, piecing it all from what happened around across the Pacific, across the globe, of these stories of survival and courage and just hard work. It's not an easy story to talk about, and we've seen it tonight. The tears in the eyes, the throat and the lump in the throat. These stories are difficult, but these stories are very important. And so I want to thank from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of Wati Ngintakanya, the panelists, the amazing panelists who have put time and shared their stories and their knowledge and their skills and their expertise in bringing a little light onto a touchy subject, marking 70 years of acts of, governments of the day. And so I'm very grateful for the amazing work and for everyone to continue on. We certainly know how to stand in solidarity, and we certainly know how to stand shoulder to shoulder, as we heard from Alan, and we need to strengthen that. We really need to strengthen it even more now than knowing the countries of the day are full of secrets and full of lies, and I think we need to continue to pressure that. So on behalf of my Yankunytjatjara family and this amazing country, I want to thank everyone for participating, all the many participants making your time available this evening, and also these amazing panelists that we have heard from. Sis, I'm going to hand it back to you to hear this amazing song.
Thank you so much, Gungaru, for your final words. And please, if you could just give a small clap to all our panelists this evening. So we are going to finish this evening's event with a song that was developed as part of an academic artist group, which I'm involved in, called the Unbound Collective from Flinders University. I need to acknowledge my academic sister scholars, Associate Professor Natalie Harkin, who's Narunga, Associate Professor Ali Gimilia Baker, who's Merning, Dr. Faye Roses Blanche, who's Yidinji Mabarban from Queensland. And I'd also like to acknowledge dear sister Dr. Lou Bennett, Yorta Yorta Jaja Warang woman, who's a songwoman, language activist, researcher in language repatriation. This song has come out of some of the work from the Unbound Collective in Adelaide at Vital Statistics in 29 at Yaltapulti, which is down at Port Adelaide on Gunayara country. This song has come in working with Gungaru Karina and also her dear late mother and my dear Gummy, Waniwa Lester, who we sadly miss as well, in really honouring the Kupapiti Konkujura, their strong words, their humility, their humbleness, their love and protection of country. We ended up naming this song Purple Flowers, and as part of some of our work into the future, we hope we are going to have this translated in Yankunytjatjara and have descendants from the Kupapiti Konkujura and from the Atomic Test sing this song with the incredible guidance and support by Dr. Lou Bennett. So you're going to be hearing Purple Flowers tonight, sung by Dr. Lou. Thank you.
We know this country, our ancestors say. We know our culture, and we understand. Kulila, kulila. Protect our land, Juta are leading the stand. Pulila, Irrelevante. Kuleni, irrelevante. We protect our land as our ancestors do. We cannot sit on our hands and watch you poison our fruit. Kulila, irrelevante. Kuleni, irrelevante. Irrelevante. Open your ears and open your heart. We come to share our worry with you. Open your ears and open your heart. You all wake up now. Kulila. Don't waste our country. Don't move your dumb here. Don't take it out of country. Don't bring your poison here. Irrelevante. Do they really want to kill us? Kill us straight out. It's just like our words went in the wind. But we'll never stop talking. Irrelevante. Raise up your hand. Irrelevante. Let's make a stand. Irrelevante. Let your voices sing. We don't want your poison here. We don't want your poison here. Pulling
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It has been an honour to MC this evening's event. I'd like to thank Gunga Karina. I'd like to thank all the panellists. Thank you so much for your strong messages, your words, your solidarity, and we hope that you have really found this evening insightful, motivating, continuing our activism to protect country. And I hope the words of the Kupapiri Kunkajura through the Purple Flowers song resonates with you into the evening. Thank you so much.